Good morning. This is Nancy Mackey sharing with you our July version of At the Open Gate, where this month we're talking about Simplify, freeing your mind and energizing your leadership. This is a recap of my discussion with Todd Allen earlier this morning on our web call, and just want to share some of the insights that we gained as a result. And so this is your opportunity as a leader to just step back for a few minutes, gain a few bites of information that my hope is will give you a little better peace of mind as you think about all the millions of things that you have to do and organize and stay on top of, and just finding different ways to manage all of that. So I'd ask for you to just consider this, that you really do make a difference. And this quote from Henry David Thoreau is one that I find very applicable these days when we're overburdened by information, that our life is frittered away by detail. Simplify, simplify. And one of the quotes that Todd had shared during our call earlier was that the perfect is the enemy of the good. You may have heard that before, that many of us in our quest for perfection, that we can end up overburdening not only ourselves, but the people that work for us and the people that we lead. And so that can become a problem, and that oftentimes that last 10% really isn't making the difference, and sometimes ends up creating more of a problem in the long run if we can just look at what is good. So our 3 takeaways this month that we want you to think about, and as those of you that have listened to these know, that a big focus of mine is what are the mental barriers that keep us from acting on things that we already know. There's plenty of information out there about organization and how to do things, but it's the why in our mind. Why? What is it that's stopping us from taking action or making these things habits? And so we want to talk about making peace with that inner saboteur, those thoughts and beliefs that really keep us from simplifying and making things easier for ourselves. And then we focus a little bit on the digital clutter, meaning the email and the your online organizing, and then lastly, your physical space, those things that are right around you that you see. And, why is it worth even investing the time? Number one, thinking about this and spending the time here today, listening to this, or if you joined our call earlier, and some of the benefits that you get from simplifying, or simply that you're going to have greater peace of mind. You'll end up having more time, less time spent looking for things and tracking down things that were lost, better decision making, less stress. So there's a lot of reasons why it's worth it. And if you're telling yourself that you don't have time, I really encourage you and urge you to consider it an investment in the long run. So what about that inner saboteur, those thoughts and beliefs that really do prevent us from letting go, from releasing objects or files or emails? And really what it boils down to is some level of fear of something. And so the question you might ask yourself is, what am I fearing if I let this item go or this email go? And some examples of things that people talk about are maybe that fear of missing out, or I might let go of an email that I need at some point in the future. Or I know for me, the hard one is the sentimental value. It just evokes a memory, and I feel like I'll be losing that memory. Or maybe we fear we're going to make a mistake and we want to have something as a reference. Or a big one is fear of lack. And for the folks that lived through the Great Depression would really understand that. That's not most of the folks in the workforce today, but you may have had parents or grandparents who wanted to save every little thing because they lived through a traumatic period in their lives. And one of the things that Todd talked about on our call was that it often is related to some level of trauma. So that fear of lack could be related to something in your life, and a kind of deeper issue to try to explore. So what are some of the things that you can do about it? And I would propose you have several questions that you can ask. but also just giving yourself the time and space to, number one, think about why is it that I'm hanging on to these things. Give yourself the time and space, to organize, whether it's a 1 hour chunk, whether it's a half a day, whether it's a full day, whatever works for you and your schedule, but giving yourself permission to have that time to organize. And if you're telling yourself I'm too busy to get organized, then I think it boils down to, again, rethinking what the priorities are and looking at what's the payoff for, like we talked about earlier. But some of the questions that I think are really powerful that you can ask yourself are 4 questions. What is the worst case scenario, excuse me, of letting go of something? So if I lose that email and never see it again, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? How likely is it that that worst case scenario could happen? And is there a way to replace or locate another copy? And goodness, with the cloud and the internet and multiple ways of saving things, that usually you can perhaps find another copy. Banks save statements and all those sorts of things. So, and then lastly, what is hanging on to this item costing me in terms of my time, my mental energy, the upkeep of the item? And there's really been a demonstrated cost to that, a psychological cost. There have been research studies that show that. Some other good questions just to tag on to that Todd suggested earlier are: why do you need this? How do you need this? And when do you need this? So if you run yourself through those types of questions, then that at least gives you a framework for asking why and dealing with it. And then we have the digital clutter. The digital clutter, and the way that you can deal with that is capture, analyze, and resolve. And one of the things that Todd recommends, or organizational development specialist or organizational specialist, is capturing that item in a temporary folder, either a temporary folder in your email, or if it's a physical file, having a temporary folder where you can at least put everything for the day until you have a time to deal with it, and then review that file at least once a day. The critical part then is the analyze part, where you want to think of, again, asking those 4 questions and that we just talked about, but also then limiting how you file that to 10 categories or less. And then finding, a file that you want to either file it, deal it with email, put it on the calendar, or trash it. So analyze the 4 things that you want to do with it. And then lastly, resolve. You want to try to keep your eyes on that email only once, and then again, moving that to either an appointment, a file, or a task, or trash. And the last thing we talked about was developing an accurate naming order. You want to be consistent, and you want to be create that habit. And so by creating a consistent naming order, whether you use chronological by dates or by function or by person, by client, whatever you do, make sure that you're being consistent about it over time. And I think one of the habits that we fall into is when things get stressful, we follow the path of least resistance and go to whatever's convenient and maybe overutilize that temporary folder. But the more that you can establish consistency and be disciplined about it, the more, and building that habit, and we talk about that a lot, just doing something consistently, even 3 or 4 weeks, if you can really focus on that for a period of time, you start to develop that unconscious habit, and that will help you again in the long run. And then lastly, we talked about clearing your physical space. And we talked about the 5S practice, which has its origins in the lean, kind of the manufacturing model, which has been a lot of those of you that are in those types of organizations probably understand this, but it talks about sorting, standardizing, setting an order, shining, standardizing, and then sustaining. So you want to first kind of commit to finding where that item needs to go. Where are you going to have a place for that item? What is the most logical place? Deciding on that order. Shining means reviewing, kind of looking at it periodically, straightening it up on a consistent basis, whether it's daily or weekly. And then standardizing and sustaining. Standardizing, especially if you're going to have a larger group of people involved in keeping a space organized, be it a family or be it a work group, then you want to set those standards and make sure that you communicate those standards for the long haul, which is that sustaining practice. So my hope is that you got a few tips out of our time today, or whether you joined our call, and that you will take at least one first step to moving in a direction to bringing yourself more peace and energy in your life, and learning to let go of all the things that we hang on to. And I hope you join us again next month, where I'll be talking with Janie Matson on Relationship Aikido, Skills for Challenging Behaviors, looking at some of those difficult behaviors we experience, like manipulation, hostility, and a few more. So hope you'll join us then. The link is here, but you can also go to opengateresources.com or event calendar to find next month's sign up. So have a great day.